The reason that Jenn sat there is that Jenn and Silas had this chat beforehand. They wanted to put Guy in the middle to make him squirm. So this is going to be interesting. I was advised before this panel that I should get, these guys all know each other very well. I should actually get some wine and just kind of sit back and let them have a chat. I couldn't find any wine, unfortunately, but I might just do that anyway. I'll just take a nap. Can we kick off? So we're talking about the future of data-driven channels, and basically the future state of kind of, everything is data-driven really. So what's a data-driven channel versus a non-data-driven channel? But before we kick off with that, I would like it if you could each briefly introduce yourselves. So Jenn, let's start with you.
Sure, so I'm just testing. My name is Jenn Villalobos, and I used to work at Google for 12 years across different businesses, global accounts, and that's where I met Silas. I also started in Sydney, Australia, and I worked with Guy a very long time ago. And then, oh my God, such a long time ago. And about 18 months ago, I joined NTUC Income. So yesterday, you might have seen on the panel our CMO, Marcus Chu, and talking about the great success that we've had with digital, obviously how to become a data-driven business. But I look after something very different. I look after corporate innovation, which is pretty much a team that sits outside of Income as a disruptive innovation arm. We own product, we own the consumer insights because we have a design thinking team, a DevOps team, and I don't have a team of digital marketers, I have a team of growth hackers. So pretty much we are tasked to be able to make these products commercially viable.
Thank you, Jenn. Guy.
Hi, I'm Guy. I'm Chief Product Officer at Omnicom Media Group. And before that, I was Chief Innovation Officer at Omnicom Media Group. And before that, I was Head of What's Next on Omnicom Media Group. So after a succession of suitably vague titles, management decided I actually had to produce something after all of that. So I'm now Chief Product Officer and slightly less focused on tomorrow and actually have to deliver some things today. But one of the things that I'm trying to do is trying to work with both our clients, partners, and our teams around the region to try and just make things better, try to get incrementally better every day. I think we often run into difficulties where we're striving for perfection, and I don't think in the agency world you can achieve perfection overnight, but you can try to be incrementally better than you were yesterday. And so for some clients, those solutions are really things that many people in the room would think are pretty simple, and other things are just more far-sighted and future-focused, and it really depends on horses for courses, so all of those things. And Silas is both my former colleague and my former client, so Silas.
It's a funny world, isn't it? Hi, I'm Silas. I'm the APAC Head of Media for GSK Consumer Healthcare. I guess the way I would describe my role is GSK has quite lofty ambitions about how marketing, digital, and data can be used to drive our growth ambitions. And so from a media perspective, it's how do I help deliver against those growth ambitions in those spaces, and especially from an APAC perspective, because obviously things are more exciting, more accelerated, and quite a bit different here from where the head office sits. It's about providing the organization with that understanding and how we can effectively move in the spaces that I talked about. So that's what I do.
Thank you very much. That was a fantastic overview from each of you. Guy put it perfectly. Innovation actually means different things to different people, and each client that you work with has different ideas of what that looks like. Silas, from your perspective within GSK, kind of what does innovation look like, and how do you adopt emerging channels and within that to kind of help achieve this innovation?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways you can start to talk about innovation, right? So obviously, I think Jenn talked about the notion of product innovation within an organization, and that's certainly part of what we look at, although not necessarily within the marketing remit, but there are opportunities that we can take on to adjust how consumers make themselves feel better, how they're able to do more. And that's a big part of it. From more the marketing and media side, I think there's tons of white spaces that the pharma/consumer healthcare industry really hasn't necessarily gone after yet. So the notions around truly understanding the customer and effectively and relevantly communicating with them is still quite a separated situation, because without that direct connection to the consumer, we don't sell products directly to them. Without that understanding, it becomes very difficult for us to sort of understand that. So there's a lot of space on the innovation side in terms of what I would say is modernizing our approach to media in that space. And that involves both, the strategic approach to how we deliver that innovation, but also at a sort of channel specific approach. So, I think there's a variety of ways we can do that. We talked about the service layer a few moments ago. For us, a big part of that is working with our partners, especially publicists from my perspective, who are able to bring to bear new ideas and new opportunities which we as an organization might not necessarily see, and allow us to execute against those.
Interesting. And then, so Guy, from your perspective, in your innovation roles and your what's next role, and obviously your role today, we're actually having to, I guess, put that into action and actually do something, as you were saying. How are you working with your clients to make that happen? Obviously, you talked about the fact that it's different things, different people, but is it, when you're looking at innovation and, sort of looking at, there's things like what's next. Publicis has something similar called Next Tech Now. There's also Blink within Group M. Like, there's all these kind of different things looking at what the next thing is and these emerging technologies that exist. How can you leverage them and make the most of them? And how do they play into what your clients are actually ultimately looking for?
Yeah, so I think you need to have a good understanding of what medium-term problems your clients are actually trying to solve for, because innovation very rarely solves short-term problems, right? That's more of the firefighting aspect that we all do to try and solve short-term problems. So it's trying to look at what the medium-term aspirations are, and trying to see where you can potentially fit a gap, where there's a gap in what that client has, either internally or working with other partners, and not just with the media agencies. Then it's a question of being able to work with third parties, be they startups or not, actually, because a lot of people that say startups, but it might just be some business that your client doesn't currently know much about or work with. And how can you put together a solution, or ideally a product, if you like, but a solution anyway, that tries to provide some of the insight about what consumers want, or some of the execution or orchestration layer to communicate them in a better way. How do you do that? And really importantly, how do you put some decent measurement framework around it so that you actually know whether what you're doing is a success or not? Because a lot of alleged test and learns have some testing, but not any framework to understanding whether you're learning anything or not. And it's like, yeah, this worked really well. Why did it work? Why do you think it worked really well? And in some cases, clients and agencies have a good way of measuring that, but too often they don't. So testing and learning with proper guidelines and frameworks, and that just doesn't mean adding 2% of the budget into doing something that you haven't done before. It means having a really structured approach to testing to see whether it fits a gap in what you're delivering to consumers, or a gap in what your own learning is.
And no matter what, CTR is not the answer.
No.
What? No. Oh, no one told me that.
Yeah, it would be great if there weren't so many decimal places. Yeah.
Maybe 17 years ago.
Yeah, maybe.
And Jen, so you were nodding furiously when Guy was talking about measurement and understanding, what success looks like. Obviously, your innovation in your role is very product-led. How do you determine the success of the products and the innovation that drives them?
Sure. So first, a lot of the success that we're seeing is because we don't look at it from a product line of business. We look at it from a consumer perspective. So everything that we solve for, we start off with design thinking at the core principle, which is, are we solving for a pain point that exists in the market? So think about it this way. Insurance has been around forever. NTC Income was an org that was created in 1972 with a mandate to actually provide every single Singaporean with basic insurance needs. Now, if you think about where the future is heading, the way that people in this room think about insurance is about, this is a contract. I want to see a show of hands of how many of you actually believe or have life insurance right now. Look at that. Not that many, right? A lot of it will say maybe it's because it's a life stage situation. The reality is that we're going into a day of everyday insurance. So if you look at what's happening in China, which is a market that we follow very, very closely, we're going into parametric insurance, right? And so our team pretty much looks at what is valuable to a consumer from an insurance perspective, and try to make that experience away from a contract that you sign to everyday algorithmic insurance. This also bypasses products and efficiency, so things like underwriting don't exist. We do everything directly through Pay Now. And then back to what Guy is saying around measurement, and I'm going to give you credit on this one. Measurement is super critical, right? So what's really pushing the technology and advancements in terms of the future of channels is not only the technology per se, it's not only about AI, it's not only about machine learning. I think it has to do with the sophistication on the client and on the buyer side, which really pushing the boundary and asking the right questions. If you're going to bring in open innovation and work with a startup, for example, as a proof of concept, do you understand how that startup is actually evaluated? Do you know what their cap table looks like? Are we projecting on it? Are they there just to solve a short-term problem for your traditional business, which happens all the time? And make sure any startup in this room, do not sign up to a short-term KPI for a business because you're going to bomb. That's the one learning. The third one for us is that we really think about this measurement, and I think digital marketing models is one way to think about it, but for us is about in the channel that we're building, beyond acquisition, beyond engagement, what is the insight that is going to allow us to feed better product enhancements and better experimentation? So we have a framework that starts off not only with the acquisition and the KPI, not only the MarTech side of the business, but also to think about, are we actually discovering something new about our online audiences? And I do have something easy. It is Singapore. It's 6 million people. So maybe it's not about the breadth of the database, but it's about the depth. And so with those three thinkings is where we're heading on how we think about innovation and marketing. As I said, there's no digital market. As a matter of fact, my team jokes when we talk traditional digital marketing. It's growth hacking for us.
Can I just add one thing on that? Just a note. So it's really important that innovation does not mean novelty, right? Innovation and novelty, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a media first, doesn't matter if it's been done before. I used to laugh because I used to have a client say, give me something unique. And I'd say, here's something unique. And she'd say, great, have you got a case study? And
yeah, I think we've all had many of those.
But actually, that's not actually stupid. Because what she's saying is, on what basis are you saying that this is going to work? Just because it's a first, on what basis are you going to say that's going to work? So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And I mean, Jenn, you put it perfectly as well. We talked a lot over the past couple of days about different channels, and I could ask you why should you invest in out of home, in audio, these emerging channels, mobile. It's been years of mobile for the past decade, and we're still not quite there, even in this mobile first region. But actually, it's not about trying to choose a channel and saying I'm investing in a channel for this reason. It's about understanding the consumer, and we talked about the word consumer is often forgotten about in this world of advertising, and it's interesting to hear it come up so often in the past few panels, and I think that's quite interesting, quite a turning point. Silas, are you looking at buying media based on what channel it is because you want to be on a billboard, or you want to be on a TV screen? Or are you looking at it based on where your consumer is?
I mean, I think the answer is obvious, right? And when I talked about some of the innovative areas that we're focused on, it's really about matching how that customer journey looks and where we can find relevant points to influence that customer journey, frankly, for the benefit of our business. That's the role of marketing. It's to use our investment and our messaging to drive the business forward. I think what's interesting for me is that the channels become, to a degree, secondary when you take that approach, right? The roles of those channels need to fit in how you're trying to influence the consumer through that journey. And that is why, for me, what's becoming helpful as things are changing in some of the channels that you're referencing are in how they're integrating into the larger existing ad tech stacks which exist, right? So, as an organization that has tied itself to Google, we're the first consumer healthcare company to have signed on with GMP. I think there's a reality there that as TV360 offers us the opportunity to purchase different channels through the same interface, we see ourselves being able to deliver against that consumer first narrative and that journey narrative because all the channels are available for us to purchase against through the interfaces that we've decided as an organization are relevant for us. So there's a real opportunity there, and I think as these channels grow up, or however you want to call it, become more solidified in terms of their roles within the programmatic space, there'll be more and more opportunities for them to become part of how we as organizations execute against them.
I think
Does anybody want to speak?
Yeah, just one topic that kind of left me thinking was the last panel. And so Michelle, and as well as Sonal and Wendy, were talking about this service layer and the complexity that organizations have. That's true. So I remember when I was on the Google side of the business, how many clients were asking, can you just simplify this for me? And the reality is that has changed. So being able to identify what that consumer journey, that holy grail of 360 consumer, the reality is that's utopic. It's never going to happen. I think what really happens now is how do we make sure that as CMOs, CTOs, CIOs, CXO, whatever we call the new upcoming changing vocation of the marketer, it's up to us to really decide what value we bring in and test and iterate it really, really quickly. So a question, and it goes back that service layer, then tech stack solution, or whatever provider we have from an agency perspective. Do you, both of you, really believe that right now, in order to be a true brand, you need to absolutely be present in every channel? Or can you just be present solving for one?
This is the toothbrush conversation again, isn't it?
It is, and thank you for letting me have my 5 cents, but Silas can have his 10 cents in a minute. 5 cents under that. I don't think you have to be omnipresent on every channel to build a brand. Although it is interesting that whenever I go to the US and I'm jet lagged in the middle of the night and turn on the television, the only ads are for either your business or for digital apps of some description or another. That's the only advertising that there is on TV in the US at that time of night. Perhaps there is at other times of the day. I don't think you need to be present on every channel. I think you need to find, I know this sounds like just sort of pie in the sky, but you need to find the right moments that matter to your consumers when they're willing to give you a little bit of their attention to engage with you in the day. To do that, you've got to get a touch point around their passion points. This is why when we broach the subject of audio, I think we as media agencies don't do anywhere near enough with audio. When people talk about content, we always have an image of visual content of some description. Audio, for many people, not for everybody, but audio is a point of passion. It's a point of engagement. If you see people on a train listening to headphones, whether they're listening to podcasts or music or whatever it might be, they are totally immersed in that space. You tend to get 100% share of voice in those sort of environments. And going back to brands, I know everything that there is to being a big podcast listener. I know that everything there is to know about Casper mattresses, and the only thing that annoys me is I can't buy one in Singapore. So, yeah.
I guess I view the notion of the customer journey as enabling us the opportunity to eliminate channels when they're not low. So I agree with you, but I guess I agree with you in the sense that that journey gives me the opportunity to say, why am I in this channel and what role does it actually play in how I connect with the consumer? Now, I think what's interesting for me is channels which I would, for certain brands with certain objectives in our portfolio, suggest would be wrong, change when I can add a signal to them, right? Yeah. So the exciting part for me is, I'll use outdoor, for example, which, as a company that's within the FMCG space, if you will, where we sell products to a wide variety of people, the notion of reach and broadcast channels like outdoor are broadly relevant, right? But the reality is there's a huge amount of waste associated with them, and there's a lack of effectiveness in a lot of their executions. So in a traditional customer journey planning, I might eliminate them from my consideration set. Whereas if a signal can be added, if some level of specificity or addressability can be added back into them, they become interesting again to me, right? And they offer the opportunity for us to consider how they might fit within a specific part of that customer's journey where as a broad channel they might not have.
Got it.
And I mean, so we've talked a lot today about, obviously we're in Singapore, and Singapore is relevant to this conversation, but there are many markets in this region, and the way that you would talk to them and the consumers within those markets are very, very different. How can data and emerging technology help to mobilize these media channels to help to interact with these consumers in a way that their media consumption is changing in the way that you never have been able to before? How are you, for example, we've talked about the Philippines and how kind of, mobile heavy the Philippines is, despite the fact that there's very slow internet. They're all, big consumers of video. How do you make sure that you're able to target the people in the Philippines versus the people in Indonesia? And how does these emerging channels help to leverage that?
Well, I think we've been talking about localized channels too. I mean, at its core, outdoor is a localized channel, right? And so what that gives us the opportunity to do is to start thinking about the ability for us to be more geographic and smart in the way we execute. So I guess a simplistic example, which is one we've used in more traditional digital, I like traditional digital channels now, is simple signals around weather variables, things like pollen count, et cetera, to influence where and when we buy, right? The reality is, without any sort of programmatic connection into the outdoor space, without any sort of signal that allows me to connect those 2 points together, without the ability to buy those, maybe not impressions because most outdoor isn't at that state yet, but the ability to be in that space at least somewhat relevantly, it fundamentally changes how we can be more on target and relevant, right? So it's not only about the audience at that moment, it's also about the environmental factors, the other influences, to Guy's point earlier, that allow us to connect with them on a more specific and relevant basis. And we talked earlier about whether advertising is relevant or not, and what people always say, people hate ads, but the reality is an ad at the right time for you is an exceptionally powerful thing. And I think all of us can personally look inside and say, there are moments where advertising connects with us beautifully because it's the right moment or the emotional context is correct or whatever it might be. The ability to deliver that has been, a game of chance historically, and now we're moving into slightly less of a game of chance.
I think that's the thing. I think that's what I find fascinating is that we talk a lot about this, and there always seems to be a lot of talk, but I see little action. And the example you just gave about being able to use pollen count and different signals to then deliver an ad. I mean, obviously you were talking about it from an out-of-home perspective, but that's not necessarily new. When I was in media many years ago, we were doing similar things with my clients. Also there's talking of your example, Guy, about Casper mattresses on the podcast you listen to. I mean, there is so much opportunity for ad insertion for you to receive relevant ads in your location, but podcasters are terrified of letting go control of their advertising, and there's massive opportunity, and they could make a lot of money out of that if they were able to be guided in the right way to do it. Is there education required? Is there actually, there's a lot of talk, but there's still too far to go when are we even close to kind of getting to the stages that we so often talk about?
Say it again, there's not enough test and learn. There's not enough genuine testing, and that's the agency's bad for not pushing it. It's clients for. I mean, nobody's saying it's bad because there's lots of day-to-day pressures to get things done, and it takes a certain amount of bravery to try new things. So it's nobody's fault, but you do need to test some of these things out. I think you just got to. A lot of getting our message in front of people is about, if you like, leading a horse to water. But it's a pretty jaded old horse in some markets. We've got to think about how you give the consumer utility, how you surprise the consumers, or, as Silas says, even though many people don't like ads, everybody does like a moment when we laugh or cry or get social capital from sharing something that's just amazing in whatever way it is and just really connects with people. That magic doesn't just happen by a group of really smart people sitting in a room and having a eureka moment. It happens from testing things out and getting better. So to your point, Lindsay, about pollen signals and things that we can do with disease, at PhD a while ago, we did a great search-related campaign triggered by outbreaks of disease. That's not new, but it is really, really good. And you can make it better through testing the environments and making it better and have proper measurement frameworks about it. So as again, innovation is not novelty. Innovation is taking something and trying to make it better.
And Jenn, I want to come to you and ask about the people aspect of innovation. We talk about the technology that underpins it, but actually how much of it is the fact that the technology is evolving? How much of it is that we as people and the way that we are using that technology and leveraging it is evolving?
Got it. So I think one of the biggest questions we asked also was, out of these channels, what's really underpinning the technology and is there development? And obviously, there's great technology out there. I think not only Google, Facebook, a lot of the startups are starting to really disrupt with what's happening from a digital perspective. Alibaba, anybody who follows all the Ant businesses, it's fascinating, right? It's a very different scale. Now, what I feel is pushing a lot of the testing and experimenting with the technology side are the people. And in my org, the way that we think about it is because we also sit closely to a team of DevOps, so we have software developers that help us with the product and we sit next to them. We see and we take out of their framework Agile. So Agile from a software development perspective, this is having your Scrum Master, having your project owners, understanding how they develop, how they operate, and how they execute to get to MVP. Which is minimal viable product stage, and both the products that I look after are still in MVP. That is what we've then inherited and grabbed as a commercial business arm to go, okay guys, now let's think about agile marketing. So when we think about marketing from an agile perspective, it's pretty much moving away from authority, from stack, from solution that we're already used to let's go and sit down and craft this out and have always on true experimentation. And I'm gonna give you an example of that. In October, we launched a product that's called Droplet. And so Droplet, what it does, it protects in Singapore any rider that is on Grab, Ride, and Gojek against surges when it rains. So this utilizes predictive analytics and our own actual data to be able to identify when the price of a surge happens, and the product will actually pay up to 60% of that surge price. Right, and so
that's very cool. Yeah.
Yes, it's called Droplet. So anybody who wants to see it, I'm happy to. A bit of a plug, give you a promo code, okay? It's because what it is and what's really hard is the growth side of it, right? Because we are introducing a new behavior. So when you're introducing a new behavior for something that has never been tested out before, the traditional way of marketing is not going to work. It definitely is, and I can tell you because of the first 2 weeks when I inherited the product, the first thing that I did was grab my little page of what I've been doing for the past 12 years and try to apply it, and I bombed really quickly. And so I had to pull out that spend and go, okay, what are we going to do next to really try to do this? And I think a lot of the key learnings were from, because we built this, doesn't mean that the innovation and the way to grow it has to stay within this direct-to-consumer channel. We need to be able to think about partnerships. And so this is where we have a partnership right now going on with the other product, with Pinferal and Skyscanner. We understand that Skyscanner allows us to be able to grab the same algorithm and apply it to flights, right? And it's within that thinking, going away from only thinking direct-to-consumer to B2B, what is driving us to continue to test and iterate. It's small. So if you ask me, am I making millions out of it? Absolutely not. Am we struggling to grow the product? Yes. Where I see all the different channels and thinking differently about the channels that I used to try to grow them, an opportunity is to really, really go deeper. So it's less about the big volume and acquisition, more around how many people, for example, that have bought the policy come back. And what we've seen is that people come back, they buy it 5 or 6 times, so we have this huge loyalty base that is not the big numbers that maybe my board may ask me about, but I continue to say this is how we grow them and how we enable them. And so what we've been able to do is kind of structure new segmented audiences that income has never had access to before, to be able to delve it into the new products that they're developing on the core side of the business.
That's really interesting. I mean, we have that in APAC. There is some fascinating infrastructure in certain markets, and there is obviously a lot of data and a lot of opportunity to use that data. And I'm not saying we want to get to a stage. Do we want to get to a stage where I'm walking down the street with my phone and I'm getting a one-to-one billboard ad come up, and then the same ad appears, or I'm watching iFlix on my phone? Are we getting to that stage? We want to get to that stage. But is there, Guy? You've talked a lot about test and learn, and it feels like there's a reticence in this region versus, say, Europe and North America, where people are very happy to just spunk budget on things and go, oh, well, it didn't work, let's try something else.
I mean, I think wouldn't necessarily say that it's a regional thing per se, but yes, there is a reluctance or a hesitation or a caution going beyond things that are known in some occasions. Again, I don't think that's bad. I think you should have some belief that there is some sign of success from doing things. I don't think that's a stupid thing. Now, to go back to your, do you want a one-to-one billboard? No consumer has ever said, wow, that billboard is not personally relevant to me, what a disgrace. Except Silas. But I do think you will find, and in my 9 seconds left, I do think you'll find increasingly some closed consumer loops coming into play, whether that's driven by blockchain technology or whether it's driven by something. But you will find some closed loops where advertisers who want to reach a certain audience, a high value or a hard to reach audience, or an audience that they want to keep an ongoing relationship will try to incentivize the consumer to have some input into the whole advertising ecosystem so that relationship is formed. I thought that until I went around asking my clients who'd be interested in doing some testing around that, and it was all FMCGs who said yes, which was really interesting and not what I expected at all.
PII for you.
No, sorry, Jenn, carry on.
Yeah, the biggest challenge with the finance industry is that we are highly regulated by MAS, and so I think data privacy and ownership is something that Income takes very, very seriously. And so we work very closely with MAS and the sandbox to make sure that they allow us a safe environment to test out these sandboxes, but it's tough.
I also think GSK toothbrushes is where the future, the innovation is.
I didn't say that. No, I think the reality is certain channels actually conspire against themselves from an innovation perspective. And I've been hammering on about outdoor, but I'll put it in that bucket. Older members of the audience may recall briefs from clients, if they were ever on the agency side, about buying a billboard outside the CEO's house.
Yes.
And it was the notion of the tangibility of that campaign, which was so relevant. So the idea that you are going to automate and real-time bid on blocks of outdoor time, so I walk by one day and my ad is there and the next day it's not, is quite scary for people. Older members of the audience might remember taking screen caps of their digital campaigns and sending them to clients as post-buys.
You would also set campaigns up that were targeted to the region that you knew your CEO lived in, or the region that the HQ was.
Exactly.
They would see the ads.
So there's this, I think part of the barrier will be having organizations understand and, in a way, trust the notion of how the technology works and how you'll actually get a much greater upside by being smarter about the way you deploy versus being sort of generalist and purely reach-based for the lack of any other definition.
Interesting, and everyone's nodding furiously. On that note, it's a shame to end. It's a very interesting conversation, but I want to say thank you very much to Jenn, Guy, and Silas. Give them a round of applause. Thank you, everyone.